Cress theory of the Holocaust. Heretofore, the destruction of the Semites of the Jewish religion and the Gypsies of Europe have been presented as a confounding puzzle. Well, there is an answer. Horrendous, yes, but not at all difficult to understand. And the implications for Black people are profound. The New York Times, in an article entitled Brandeis to Set Up Institute on Causes of Holocaust, reported, Brandeis University will establish a research institute to study the cause of the Holocaust. The 15-year period in which more than 6 million Jews were killed in Europe... by autumn. The 32-year-old Jewish-sponsored but non-sectarian university expects to have a dozen junior and senior researchers at work, planning conferences, lectures, and articles on the period and the approximately 150 years of events leading up to it. As important as they are, we no longer need any more collections of memoirs by survivors, pictures of concentration camps, and research into the mechanisms of Hitler's final solution for the Jews, said Marvel H. Benstein, president of the university. What's needed now and in the future is an attempt to account for what happened, to explain why, and to give some insight into future events if possible. Mr. Benstein said the institute would be financed by an $800,000 grant from Dr. Laxlow Tauber, a surgeon in the Washington, D.C. area and survivor of a forced labor camp in Hungary. It will be the only institute of its kind in this country, Mr. Bernstein said, and the only one outside of Israel, where the Hebrew University in Jerusalem has a similar study group called the Hand of God. Unlike that research institute, which concentrates on the Holocaust years 19,300,000 and 1,945, the Brandeis Institute intends to look at the broader range of Western European history from about the time of Napoleon's emancipation of the French Jews in the first decades of the 1800s. We cannot bring them back, Dr. Tauber said of the estimated 20 million civilians, Jewish and non-Jewish, who died in Nazi labor and concentration camps, but I would like to see people educated to the realization that it can happen anywhere, anytime, again. Whereas I am not an invited scholar nor a petitioner to attend the Tauber Institute at Brandeis University, I have been a student of anti-Semitism in Europe and the destruction of the Semites of the Jewish religion since the mid-1950s. Throughout that time, I remained convinced that the treatment of the Semites of the Jewish religion in Europe and in America was intimately related to the gradual destruction of Black people, as well as the millions of native peoples found in the Americas by the immigrating whites from Europe, a pattern which continues to the present. Further, I was convinced that the final solution for the Semites in Europe was associated with the atomic bomb solution for the Japanese peoples in World War II, and that the anti-Semitism of Europe and America was intimately related to the apartheid of Southern Africa and to the historic pattern of treatment of all of the peoples classified as non-white or non-Aryan peoples by the peoples who classify themselves as white or Aryan. One of the serious flaws in Western logic, thought, and scholarship is to perceive fragmented abstractions that are never united as one. This and perception that begins with the perception and analysis of the whole, so as to place in accurate perspective any parts or fragments which may be isolated from the whole. The focus on the destruction of the Semites of the Jewish religion as an abstraction outside of the context of the totality of the historic Western civilization and cultural imperative explains why there has not been to date a comprehensive understanding of the Semitic destruction in Europe from 1933 to 1945. Indeed, the Tauber Institute at Brandeis University will not find the answers it seeks with the limited historical perspective of only 150 years of history of Semites in Europe. Sometimes at deep unconscious levels, people do not really wish to find answers to problems that they obsessively complain about, even when that problem has caused the death of 6 million people. There is the conscious awareness, perhaps, of the need to know the whole truth and to understand in depth. But below this surface, there is the more powerful need to maintain the status quo, which depth knowledge and awareness would explode in volcanic fashion. Specifically, I am referring to perhaps an unconscious need on the part of Semites of the Jewish religion to avoid confronting and therefore understanding their entire historic experience amongst the whites in Europe, in addition to their prior experience with the whites while they still resided in Africa 2,000 years ago. However, I have no such unconscious need. To the exact contrary, I perceive the existing chaos and injustice on the planet Earth to be of such horrendous magnitude that this global evil needs to be broken asunder by the surfacing of depth knowledge and insight, so that the true calm of a greater justice can evolve and prevail. It is just as when a volcano spews forth the molten materials from its core, the soil upon which the ash falls becomes enriched and more fertile from that which subsequently springs forth. This essay, then, is for all Black people and for others who wish to understand the destruction of the Semites and Gypsies in Europe between 1933 and 1945. It is a presentation of the critical datum that will totally clarify once and for all why there was anti-Semitism in Europe and why a final solution for the Semites as well as for the Gypsy population in Europe was needed. It is necessary at this point to reiterate the key issues of the Cress theory of color confirmation and racism. The white supremacy necessity is to establish, maintain, expand, and refine the power equation white over non-white, while power over all peoples with an ancestral history of substantial melanin skin pigmentation that can be genetically transmitted. The white genetic phenotype can be maintained on the planet Earth only through this means. The implications of the Cress theory are that all behavioral patterns in the global white collected begin and end with the conscious and/or unconscious consideration of white genetic survival and the corollary consideration of the global threat of white genetic annihilation by the non-white majority. Were this not the foremost consideration of the global white collective, a white population would not exist on the planet Earth. It would have succumbed to white genetic annihilation, and therefore never would have been an organized psychological and military defense. So, what does all of this have to do with the mass destruction of members of the Jewish religion living in Europe and the phenomenon of anti-Semitism? First, much confusion has arisen because of the conscious and/or unconscious insistence of mixing a discussion of religion with a discussion of race, specifically as it concerns the Semitic population that practices the Judaic religion. This population migrated from Africa and has resided in Europe for the past 2,000 years. The Holocaust in Europe was the end result of the long-standing dynamic of anti-Semitism. Semite refers to a racial group. Thus, anti-Semitism was a dynamic directed specifically against a group with a distinct racial background, which incidentally practiced a particular religion. A Semite is conventionally defined as a member of any of the people whose language is Semitic, including the Hebrews, Arabs, Assyrians, Phoenicians, Babylonians, etc. The adjective Semitic is defined as one, of, characteristic of, or like a Semite, or the Semites too, designating or of a major group of languages of southwestern Asia and northern Africa related to the Hamitic languages and divided into East Semitic, Northwest Semitic, and Southwest Semitic. Webster's New World Dictionary also informs us that the prefix semi means half, as in semi-diameter. Thus, both of the words Semite and Hamite could refer to peoples who were black, but a mulatto-type mixture of black and white and combinations thereof, hence semi, or hemi, half black and half white. Much like the present mixed black or colored population in the U.S., or wherever white males have sexually aggressed against African females. A fine example is the Roman soldiers' sexual aggression against African women. In my decoding, the word Semite, as from the Latin prefix semi, means someone whose ancestry was a black and white mixture, therefore black. In the Washington Post, in an article entitled Pope to View Poland's Black Madonna, Silvana Foa reports, the mysterious Black Madonna of Częstochowa is the most sacred icon in Poland. It is also one of the most haunting and beautiful works of religious art in the world. Pope John Paul II, a strong advocate of devotion to the Virgin Mary, will travel to the Hilltop Monastery in June to show his special devotion to the strange painting depicting Christ's mother as a black woman. Art. Experts believe the Madonna was painted between the 6th and 8th centuries and say the style is reminiscent of early Egyptian Christians. Many art historians believe the Madonna is one of the rare black Madonnas still extant. Most of the Madonnas painted in the earliest centuries of Christendom were black, according to historians, and it wasn't until the Renaissance that it became popular to give the Mother of Christ the features of a Florentine maiden. The features of a Florentine maiden means the features and coloring of a white woman. Thus, religious and art history support the fact that the Semites were black people with the highly esteemed personage of Jesus and his mother as evidence. In the diaspora of the Semites of the Jewish religion, after the Babylonian exile, 2,000 or so years ago, Semites left Africa and went to Europe. With continuing genetic admixture, with the European population operating under the definition that a Jew is anyone whose mother is a Jew, it was possible, if enough, white males had sexual intercourse with a sufficient number of Semitic or colored women for the once black population of Semites to become progressively lighter and lighter. All offspring from these white males and Semitic women of the Jewish religion then would become Jews. Over 2,000 years or 100 generations, the population that was once black became significantly lightened. Just examine how relatively light in color black peoples in the U.S. have become after only 20 generations of white male sexual aggression against African women. Just think what we could achieve in 100 generations if our goal was to become lighter and lighter with each generation. Using the well-known formula, don't marry anyone darker than yourself. It is significant to this discussion that Karl Marx, another Semite of the Jewish religion, had such dark skin that his children called him the Moor, meaning, of course, the black. Robert Heilbronner, in his book The Worldly Philosophers, states, in contrasting the appearance of Marx with his co-worker Friedrich Engels, they were very much opposites in appearance. Marx looked like a revolutionary. His children called him the Moor, for his skin was dark and his eyes deep-set and flashing. Prior to reading Heilbronner, I always had been impressed by the great similarity in appearance of Frederick Douglass, the pre-Civil War black orator, and Karl Marx. Frederick Douglass was the offspring of a black woman and a sexually aggressing white slave master, thus himself a Semite or mulatto. Another Semite of the Jewish religion who was identified as a black was Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein, the great Nobel Prize physicist, as documented by Robert Clark's Einstein, the life and times was once described as 1.76 meters tall, broad-shouldered, with a slight stoop. His short skull seems remarkably broad. His complexion is swarthy. Webster's New World Dictionary defines the word swarthy as having a dark skin, dusky dark. Sin, see dusky. The same dictionary defines dusky as 1. Somewhat dark in color, shadowy, swarthy. 2. Lacking light. Dusky suggests a darkness of color or absence of light, verging on blackness. Swarthy and tawny both refer only to color. Swarthy suggesting a dark brown verging on black. The Encyclopedia Britannica described Einstein as a young man, not very tall, with a wide and long face, and a great mane of crispy, frizzled, and very black hair, sprinkled with gray and rising from a lofty brow. His nose is fleshy and prominent, his mouth small, his lips full, his cheeks plump. This was a description of Einstein in his middle 30s. Crispy and frizzled hair is 1/2 step away from Kirky hair. Again, we see in the person of a most prominent Semite descriptive features that are associated with the genetic stock of the African continent: swarthy skin and crispy frizzled hair. We now come to Sigmund Freud, a Semite of the Jewish religion, born in Austria, a physician and psychiatrist and founder of psychoanalysis. In a July 23, 1979 Time book review of Freud, biologist of the mind, entitled, "Did Freud Build His Own Legend?" Frank Sulloway revealed, Sigmund Freud idolized Hannibal, so much that for years he was psychologically unable to enter Rome because Hannibal had never set foot in the city. It is interesting that Sigmund Freud, a Semite of the Jewish religion, should identify himself with Hannibal. Hannibal was a black man. Hashtag Encyclopedia Britannica. Hannibal, one of the great military leaders of antiquity, commanded the Carthaginian forces against Rome in the Second Punic War. After the Romans declared war in 219 BC, Hannibal, at the command of a force of about 40,000 and a number of elephants, crossed the Pyrenees into southern Gaul. From there, he executed an incredible feat to military enterprise, proceeding across the Alps into northern Italy. In 217 BC, at the Battle of Lake Trasimene, he inflicted one of the greatest defeats suffered by Rome. I have quoted the above sources extensively because there is a significant reason why 3 of the greatest Semitic thinkers of the Jewish religion have been described as dark in appearance or have identified themselves, as in the case of Freud, with blackness. Freud even went further in his last work, Moses and Monotheism, written in part while fleeing from the Nazis, to describe the founder of the Jewish religion, Moses, as an Egyptian, meaning, of course, a black man. Each of these representative Semites of the Jewish religion either has identified himself or has been identified by others with blackness, primarily because the Jewish Africa 2,000 years ago were black people. That is the reason that all of the earliest paintings of the Madonna and Child were a black Madonna and Child. They were Africans. The modern-day, highly misconducted Semites of the European experience may want and may have wanted in the past to forget their black ancestral heritage and suppress this truth. But the global white collective never has forgotten this critical fact. Always, the white collective, consciously or unconsciously, must remember this fact in relationships with Semites and all other peoples whose genetic history causes the whites to classify them as non-whites, if there is to be white genetic survival. Adolf Hitler, other Germans and Europeans, all of whom are whites, were aware of the greater origin of the Semites, no matter how light-skinned many of them may have become after 2,000 years of miscegenation with the whites or Aryans. Hitler and his followers not only mandated the destruction of the Semites, but also the destruction of the Gypsies. Webster's New World Dictionary defines gypsy as N, earlier Gypsyon, short for Egyptian. Egyptian, so called because thought to have come from Egypt, a member of a wandering Caucasian people with dark skin and black hair found throughout the world. The reader should not conclude that the word Caucasian means white. Often, Caucasian is used to refer to dark-skinned peoples who may have straight hair. However, white means white and Caucasian means Caucasian. The reason Hitler gave for making the Semites and Gypsies priorities on the list of destruction was that they were classified by the whites as non-white peoples whose origin was in Africa. These non-white peoples were considered genetically inferior to the whites, but capable of causing white genetic annihilation. Therefore, it was considered essential by those who were interested in white genetic survival to destroy those in their midst whom they believed could cause white genetic annihilation. All non-white peoples can cause white genetic annihilation because of their ability to produce melanin skin pigmentation. Hitler made it absolutely clear that his objective was global white supremacy and white racial purity. The specific fear of white genetic annihilation, while always present in the global white collective, becomes more prominent and is more frequently acted upon in times when whites have lost a war and/or when there is serious economic uncertainty. At these times, the white collective feels insecure because the major props for the sense of white invincibility and for white genetic survival, their guns and money, seem to have failed. Thus, after the Germans' loss of World War I, there appeared on the scene a dynamic spokesperson, articulating the need to destroy those perceived as capable of ultimate white destruction. In the United States, we are in such a period. There has been the loss of the Vietnam War, followed by political instability, and there is high-level inflation and unemployment. Thus, we witness increasing levels of activity of Nazis, skinheads, the Ku Klux Klan, and other spokespersons, such as Nobel Prize laureate Dr. William Shockley, articulating the need to get rid of black people and discussing black genetic inferiority. Some also focus in the Semites as a problem. This behavior must not be looked upon as immoral, as though it can be challenged by moral persuasion. This logic, thought, speech, action, emotional response, and perception is of absolute logical necessity for a people who historically have been in fear of their genetic annihilation by black and other non-white peoples. The term anti-Semitism means white supremacy. A Holocaust, the open destruction of non-white people by white people, occurs when 1. There is a sufficient level of insecurity or anxiety in the white population relative to white genetic annihilation. 2. There is no longer a plan. Or 3. It is considered too expensive to keep non-whites confined in ghettos, prisons, barrios, banhustans, concentration camps, on reservations, or on welfare. Holocausts also occur when whites consider it necessary to relocate non-white peoples for labor purposes. Presently, a Holocaust is occurring in the jungles of Brazil, and the victims are the native peoples of the area, so-called Indians. The Semites of the Jewish religion always have referred to themselves as God's chosen people. However, they have debated amongst themselves the reason they were chosen and what they were chosen to do. I have answered these questions in the following way. They were chosen to help all of the other non-white peoples of the world living under white supremacy domination to understand that no matter how much you may mix with and intermarry with people who classify themselves as white, no matter how light-skinned you may become through loss of melanin pigment, no matter how straight your hair may become, no matter how much you may shrink the size of your nose, no matter how many flowers, judges, professors, scholars you may produce, no matter how many musicians, friends, Marxes, or or Rubinsons you produce, no matter how as non-white under the conditions of you may obtain, if you are classified the hammer of white supremacy falls, you will be under that hammer. The Semites of the Jewish religion were chosen to teach a very important moral, and that is, never disrespect or be ashamed of the black genetic heritage of Africa. And speak up for, own up to, protect and defend that heritage with your very life, should conditions and events ever call upon you to do so. Be proud to be black, and be proud to be non-white. This is a profound lesson in self-respect for all of the people in the world.